'Twas the week before Christmas, and all through the fandom, the Trekkies were asking their questions at random. Which series or doctor or captain is best? Between Jake and Wesley, who was worse dressed? But only one question's directing our dealings, the one about Data, and if he has feelings. On Data, on Norman, on Soji, on Lore, on Reyna and Ruck and Dodge and B4. Okay, I'm done. Before you worried I was going to make the entire video, Paul, I thought about it, but then I thought, nah, it's Christmas. Speaking of which, it is the holiday season as I'm releasing this, and it's kind of the perfect time for this video. I didn't plan it that way. I was commissioned to make this video by my viewer, Lester Rookford. Thanks, Lester. And it just wound up in this spot on my production schedule. But I'm glad it worked out this way because, for whatever reason, stories about constructed people who magically transform into real people have become staples of the holidays over the years. You got your Frosty the Snowman, you've got your Nutcracker, you've got your Pinocchio. That's not specifically a Christmas story, but Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio just came out, so I'm counting it. Did you watch that yet, by the way? It's really good. Drags a bit in the middle, but then more than makes up for it in the third act. The ending just plunges its hand into your chest and tears out your heart and squashes it in its fist in a good way. Star Trek introduced its own version of Pinocchio with the debut of Star Trek The Next Generation. Lieutenant Commander Data, the android who tells Commander Riker in their first scene together that even though he is superior to humans in many ways, he would give all of that up to be human. Just to make sure we all get it, Riker then literally calls him Pinocchio. You gotta love that subtle Star Trek writing. The thing to which Data really aspired was to feel emotions. Barring the miraculous intervention of a godlike being, Data knew he would never actually become a human. He would always be an android, but he did have some reason to expect that one day he would be able to feel the same emotions as his crewmates on the Enterprise. And eventually he does. At the start of The Next Generation's 7th season, he finally claims an emotion chip that had been made for him by his father, Noonien Sung, and stolen by his evil twin brother Lore. And then, in the first film to feature the TNG crew, Star Trek Generations, with some help from Geordi, Data plugs the emotion chip into his robot brain, and from then on, he can feel all the feelings. But the question is, was the emotion chip even necessary? One of the more frequently shared fan theories pertaining to TNG is that Data has always been capable of feeling emotions, or at the very least has already developed the ability by the time he has the emotion chip installed and just doesn't realize it. At first glance, this theory would seem to be directly contradicted by the TV series and films. The fact that Data cannot feel emotions is stated explicitly and repeatedly throughout Star Trek The Next Generation. However, if we dig a little deeper in our analysis, we do find that the theory is supported by some evidence from the text. There's a free tip for you, by the way. If you're doing critical analysis of a movie or a TV show and you want to really sound like a smarty pants who knows what they're talking about, refer to it as the text. The film nerds will eat that shit up. Okay, now, back to my video about whether or not the robot man from Star Trek had fifis. Much of the evidence for Data's unacknowledged emotionality comes in the form of moments from TNG where he appears to be acting emotionally or thinking in emotional terms. I'm going to talk about a few of those, but before I get there, I want to establish something more fundamental. For the premise of Data having emotions all along to make sense, Data would have to be experiencing emotions without having an awareness that it's happening. Is that even possible? And are there other examples from the show where Data demonstrates abilities he's not supposed to have? As far as whether or not it's possible, I think it is, in the sense that it fits in with other aspects of Data's personality and behavior that we see throughout the series. For example, despite his immense brain power and logical, analytical nature, Data does sometimes seem to accept received information uncritically if it comes from a source he regards as an authority. For example, in Season 1 of TNG, Data encounters his twin brother Lore, who can feel emotions, and tells Data that he, Data, can't feel emotions because he is less perfect, while Lore is the more refined and advanced model. Data apparently believes this for years. Data and Lore are reunited in the 4th season episode Brothers, when they both respond to a homing signal sent by their father, Dr. Noonien Sung, where Dr. Sung tells Data that he is not less perfect than Lore, that he and Lore are virtually identical except for a bit of programming. Data is incredulous. Lore has told him he was the inferior brother, and he just kind of accepted it. He operated on that assumption from that point on. Why is that relevant to whether or not Data has emotions? Well, another assumption upon which Data operated was the assumption that he was incapable of feeling emotion. With that assumption in place, Data interpreted his own experience through that lens. Even if he did have an emotional experience, he would have understood and articulated that experience in non-emotional terms because he assumed emotions weren't something he was capable of having. At various times throughout TNG, Data describes his own experiences in what sound like emotional terms. Likewise, he occasionally behaves in accordance with motivations that would seem to be necessarily emotional in nature. For example, in Skin of Evil, after the funeral service for Tasha Yar, Data tells Captain Picard that he's been preoccupied with how empty his life will feel without her. Does that sound like how an unfeeling machine would respond to the death of a friend? And remember how he defines friendship to Tasha's sister, in fact, in the 4th season episode Legacy. His brain grows accustomed to the sensory input patterns of people, and eventually he comes to anticipate those patterns and misses them when they're absent. Is that Data attempting to articulate what for humans is an unavoidably emotional experience in unemotional terms? Or is he describing an emotional experience in unemotional terms because that's the only vocabulary he has to describe it with? In the 2nd season episode Pen Pals, Data knowingly violates the Prime Directive in order to communicate with Sarjenka, a child on a planet that is about to be destroyed by a natural disaster. And when Captain Picard orders Data to cut off contact with Sarjenka and allow nature to take its course, Data responds by putting Sarjenka's frightened pleas for help on speakers in Picard's quarters. Can you emotionally manipulate people to get what you want if you yourself don't have emotions? Maybe, but can you be this good at it? In episode after episode, Data exhibits loyalty and bravery and selflessness and thoughtfulness, curiosity and awe. He expresses what seems to be appreciation, gratitude, regret, self-confidence, and self-doubt. These would all seem to necessarily have some emotional component. There are times where he sure looks like he's smiling. Not what I meant, but that is hilarious. And the motivation that sits at the very center of his character, the desire to become human. Desire? Yearning? Are these not emotions? So, is it possible that Data has been experiencing emotions all along? He just hasn't realized it? I think so. Now, there is also evidence from the text, that contradicts this theory, and I'll get to some of that. But first, are there examples from TNG of Data demonstrating abilities that he isn't supposed to have? As a matter of fact, there are. My favorite such example is found in an episode from TNG's 3rd season, The Most Toys. As the episode begins, the Enterprise is taking possession of a bunch of tritium, a highly unstable substance which they need to clean up a contaminated water supply at a Federation colony. Data is in the middle of ferrying the last load of tritium to the Enterprise when, oh no, his shuttlecraft explodes. Everyone is shocked. Picard is like, Data, oh my sweet friend Data, I can't believe you're gone. Did we get enough hydradium for the thing? Of course, Data is fine, at least more fine than he would be if he'd actually been blown up. Before the shuttle left on its final return trip to the Enterprise, Data was incapacitated by Varia, a woman who works for Kivas Fajo, the trader who provided the Enterprise with the hydradium. Believing Data to be dead, the Enterprise warps away to purify the water at the colony. Then we cut to Fajo's ship, where Data comes to and is informed by an absolutely delighted Fajo that he is now part of Fajo's collection of rare objects. So I'm a prisoner, Data says. No, not a prisoner, Fajo assures him. You will be prized. Your every wish will be fulfilled. Cool, then I wish to leave. Not that one. So I'm a prisoner. Don't be silly. Exotic animals are kept in zoos for the enjoyment of people all over the galaxy. Are they prisoners? I mean, kinda. Fajo gives Data a quick tour of the rest of his collection. He's got a sculpture, he's got a vase, he's got a baseball card, he's got a puppet. And the best part, he tells Data, is that everything is one of a kind, just like Data. I guess they didn't know that Lore was still alive at this point, so I'll let that one slide on a technicality, and also because I don't really give a shit. Data tells Fajo that what he has done is immoral and illegal, and Fajo's like, yeah, but I'm good with that, and you'll get used to it. And then he leaves to take care of some business stuff. A little while later, Fajo comes back, and he's like, hey, why are you still wearing your Starfleet uniform? I want you to put on those clothes Varia brought you in that scene Steve skipped over. Data's like, nah. So Fajo goes over to his replicator and says, 1 bottle of acid, please. And he throws the acid on Data and tells him, look, in a few minutes, your uniform is going to be completely dissolved. So you can either put on the clothes I got for you, or you can just walk around naked from now on. It's your choice. I've got a guest coming over who wants to meet you. You can be fully clothed or be freely swinging that meatless sausage around. I don't care. Just make up your mind by dinner time. Data puts on his new clothes. Dinner time rolls around, and Fajo comes back accompanied by Varia and their guest Paylor Toph, who is rocking some very uncomfortable-looking face jewelry. Fajo's clearly trying to impress this dude, so they walk up to Data, and Fajo's like, check it out, got me an android, the only sentient android in existence, baby, Data. Say hi to the nice, envious man. But Data just stands there, perfectly still, saying nothing. Fajo tries again, but Data is in full mannequin mode. While Fajo fumes, Toph just laughs like, yeah, real nice sentient android you got there. Fajo swats at Data, activating Fajo's personal protective force field, knocking Data over. Toph's like, he takes a good bump at least, and then walks off with Varia. Fajo is not happy. He tells Data that he will regret this. Joke's on you, Fajo. Regret is an emotion, and Data doesn't have emotions. Or maybe he does. Oh shit, that's what this video is about, isn't it? We check in on the Enterprise, where everyone is being all mopey because they think Data's dead, and also they arrive at that colony and fix up their little water contamination problem, although the circumstances of said contamination are starting to look suspicious. There doesn't seem to be a natural cause for it, and it just so happens that the amount of hydradium they were able to procure from Fajo before the shuttle exploded is the exact amount they need to neutralize the contamination. Huh. Back to Fajo's ship, where Data is checking out this forgery of the Mona Lisa that Fajo, gullible dipshit that he is, has convinced himself is the real thing. Fajo walks in and he says to Data, okay, so this whole you not doing what I tell you to do thing needs to stop. You need to stop arguing and resisting and just comply. I got you a nice chair over there. You don't even sit in it. Go sit in the chair. Data's like, nah. So Fajo opens up his wall safe and pulls out a gun. And he says, this isn't just a phaser. This is a Veron T disruptor, a weapon invented by some sick fuck that not only kills you, it tears you apart from the inside out. It's an extremely painful death, and I've always wanted to try it. So here's what we're going to do. Oh, Varia! And Varia comes in, and Fajo talks about how long they've been together, how he found her when she was barely an adult. Classy. and ever since, he's been making all her dreams come true. And then he levels the disruptor at Varya and says, "I'm gonna miss you." Data's like, "Fine, I'll sit in the chair. Chill out, dude. Shit." Later, Data's trying to break into that safe and get that disruptor because apparently Fajo just put it right back after revealing its location to the super strong and intelligent android who really wants to escape. When Varya walks in, surprisingly, she would also like to leave the guy who just threatened to vaporize her in an uncomfortable way. She agrees to help Data, opens the safe and grabs the disruptor, and away they go to the cargo bay. They try to steal one of Fajo's shuttles, but two of Fajo's goons run in and try to stop them. In the scuffle, Varya drops the disruptor. Then Fajo himself runs in carrying another Veranti disruptor. Varya goes for the disruptor she dropped, but can't reach it, and Fajo vaporizes her. Data, who has dealt with the goons by this point, picks up the other disruptor and points it at Fajo. He says, "The jig's up, Fajo. Surrender now or I'll burn you up like an accurate history book in Texas." Fajo's like, "No, you won't. I know your programming doesn't permit that sort of thing. You have a fundamental respect for all living beings. You're not going to kill me. You're going to go back to your room and sit in your chair because you're just an android. You don't feel anger. You don't feel a need for revenge over what I just did to Varya. It's all just an intellectual puzzle for you, isn't it, you fucking robot?" Data thinks about it for a moment. And then he says, "I cannot permit this to continue," and shoots Fajo with the disruptor. Of course, at that same moment, a transporter beam activates, bringing Data back to the Enterprise. His friends have figured out that Fajo faked the accident and have come to the rescue. Working the transporter console, Chief O'Brien reports that there's a discharged weapon being beamed over, along with Data. He deactivates it, and Data materializes, asks Riker to take Fajo into custody on murder, kidnapping, and theft charges, and hands over the disruptor. Riker takes the gun and says, "O'Brien says it had been fired when we beamed you over. You know what that's all about?" Data looks at him and says, "Perhaps something occurred during transport." Then we get a brief epilogue where Data drops by the brig to visit Fajo, who has been arrested. Fajo says, "Oh, I guess you came by to gloat, huh? Seeing me here in this cage, knowing my collection has been confiscated, it must give you a lot of pleasure, huh?" And Data's like, "No, it does not. I do not feel pleasure. I'm only an android." It seems to me there are a few aspects of this episode that are relevant to the question at hand. First, and most obviously, there's Data's choice to lie to Riker there at the end. Or if you think lie is too harsh a term for it, Data shoots Fajo at the same moment as the transporter beam is energized, so technically something occurred during transport is accurate. Let's just call it Data's choice to mislead Riker as to what took place. Data's not supposed to be able to do that, is he? Lie to, or at least willfully mislead, his superior officer in order to avoid admitting that he just tried to kill Fajo? And yet that's what he does. Also, as Fajo himself points out correctly, based on what we've seen about Data prior to this point in the series, Data's not supposed to be able to choose to summarily execute Fajo with that disruptor, and yet that's what he does. Also, doesn't Data's decision to shoot Fajo seem like an emotional reaction? Perhaps even, dare I say, an overreaction? I don't mean to suggest that Fajo is anything other than a massive piece of shit. Fajo is a monster even before he murders Varya. He totally has it coming from my perspective. But from Data's? Fajo taunts Data by saying that Data has no choice but to shoot, but that's not actually true. Data possesses incredible speed and strength. He's already disabled Fajo's henchmen. Presumably he could easily overpower and restrain Fajo before Fajo could get away or do anything to harm Data. If Data is a logical android with ethical programming and no emotional influence, which is what we're told by Fajo and by Data himself, why wouldn't he do that? Instead of attempting to kill Fajo by shooting him with a gun that causes a particularly torturous death. Finally, The arc of the episode itself leads you to conclude that Data does have emotions, or at least to strongly consider that possibility. Why else is the epilogue with Fajo in the brig there? The episode could easily have ended with Data lying to Riker about how the disruptor was fired. That ending would have been suggestive on its own, but it goes on and doubles down on the suggestion that Data is actually capable of feeling emotions by showing us Data visiting Fajo and having Fajo feed a line that allows Data to claim he is only an android, a statement which we are clearly supposed to take as ironic. At least that's how I interpret it. And I think that's a reasonable and even obvious interpretation. So there you go. If you want to argue that Data could feel emotions before he got his emotion chip, one very strong piece of evidence is the fact that in the episode The Most Toys, the show itself is telling you that, or at least strongly implying it. However, this is far from an open and shut case. There are many reasons to reject this hypothesis, to believe that actually Data was not capable of feeling emotions before he got his emotion chip. The most obvious bit of evidence for Data's lack of emotion is the fact that, the implications of The Most Toys aside, the show tells us over and over again, through multiple characters, including Data himself, that Data doesn't have feelings. But I want to go beyond that. For me, the strongest evidence that Data can't feel emotions before he gets the emotion chip plugged in is that when Data does feel emotions after he gets the chip installed, and on isolated occasions before that, which I'm about to get into, he can tell the difference. In Star Trek Generations, after Geordi chips him, Data samples a drink in 10 Forward and immediately recognizes that the drink has caused him to have an emotional response. Namely, that he hates it, finds it revolting, and would love a refill, please. Before that, at the end of the 3rd season TNG episode Deja Q, one of my personal favorites, Q shows his gratitude to Data by making him laugh. When the laugh is over, Data describes it as, quote, a wonderful feeling. Now, there is a tiny little flaw in both of these pieces of evidence. I said earlier that one of the explanations for why Data might be able to experience emotions without realizing it is because he's been told that he doesn't have emotions, and so he interprets his experiences in that light, failing to recognize his emotions for what they are. If that's true, his regarding of the emotions he feels in Generations and Deja Q as being different from his typical experiences could be explained by the fact that he is given reason to believe that something different is about to happen. In Deja Q, Q tells Data that he's about to give him a going-away present. Earlier in the episode, Q and Data have a conversation where Data tells Q that he feels no human emotions and, as such, doesn't know what it's like to laugh. In light of that conversation and Data's knowledge that Q is a godlike being who can do pretty much anything, Data could have had an expectation in that moment that something outside his typical experience was about to happen, and may have even been able to anticipate what that something was going to be. In Generations, it's even simpler. He's just had his emotion chip installed. He's expecting to experience emotions. So when he does, he recognizes them immediately. So in order for this sort of evidence to really have force behind it, we need an example of Data feeling emotions that he doesn't expect to feel and recognizing them as such. We find such an example in the two-parter that bridges the 6th and 7th seasons of TNG, an episode titled Descent. The Enterprise responds to a distress call from Oniaka 3, a Federation outpost, that says it's under attack. Riker leads an away team, and when they beam down, they find a bunch of dead people and, after a little bit of looking around, some Borg. They exchange phaser fire. One of the Borg swears vengeance for the death of one of his fellow Borg. Weird. And then Data gets into a little wrestling match with one of them and seems to be getting angry as he chokes the Borg out and tosses him aside. The Borg beam out, and their ship, which the Enterprise has been fighting with above the planet, and which don't look like no Borg ship, vanishes through some kind of subspace distortion. Data's worried about the whole got angry and killed a Borg with his bare hands thing, so he has Geordi give him a physical in engineering, and Geordi makes a very good point that is relevant to folks who support the Data had emotions all along theory. He says, Data, how would you know a flash of anger from a power surge? It's a good question, although its usefulness as supporting evidence for the theory is somewhat undercut by the fact that Data was right. He not only immediately recognized that he experienced an emotion, he correctly identified the specific emotion, anger. But before they figure that out, Geordi says, how can you know you were angry when you don't know what being angry feels like because you ain't never felt shit before because you're a goddamn robot? And Data says, yeah, good point. Can you describe what it feels like to be angry? Geordi says, sure, it's like when you feel hostile. And Data's like, what's it feel like to be hostile? And Geordi says, it's like when you're belligerent. And Data says, what's it feel like to be belligerent? And Geordi says, it's like when you're combative. And Data says, what's it like to be combative? And Geordi says, it's like when you're furious. And Data says, what's it like to be furious? And Geordi says, it's like when you're indignant. And Data says, what's it like to be indignant? And Geordi says, it's like when you lose your temper. And Data says, what's it like when you lose your temper? And Geordi says, I feel incensed and intense, and my rolling rage is immense as I shake my fists at the sky. And my temperature is raising, makes my brain feel like it's blazing as my blood boils behind my eyes. And I was blinded by the light. It's a Christmas song now. Anyway, Data goes to see Counselor Troi a little later, and he tells her about his efforts to provoke further emotional responses. He's like, yeah, I listened to some opera that was supposed to be uplifting. Nothing. I checked out some holodeck programs that were supposed to be funny. Not so much as a chortle. Watched a ton of porn. Absolutely went to town on myself. Worked that thing like a shake weight. All I felt afterwards was numb on the outside and hollow on the inside. Troy's like, that's normal. Data then confesses that he felt something else when he fought the Borg earlier, an emotion other than anger, which he experienced when the fight was over and he had killed the Borg. I was looking down at the Borg's body, he says, and I felt something. I think it was pleasure. Again, totally normal. I'm not sure why you felt you had to come see me about this. Data tries to trigger another anger response by recreating his fight with the Borg in the holodeck, but it doesn't work even when he disables the safety protocols to place himself in real danger. Then, the Enterprise gets a distress call from another outpost under attack. They arrive as the newfangled Borg ship is leaving, and they follow it into its subspace distortion thingy. They travel through this wormhole-like passage called a transwarp conduit, wind up on the other side, and the Borg ship comes about and fires. At the same time, two Borg beam onto the bridge. A security nobody shoots at them and misses and gets shot himself, and then Worf takes over and shoots both of the Borg, killing one but only injuring the other. The Borg ship uses the distraction caused by the two Borg to get away. They take the surviving Borg to the brig, where Picard tries to interrogate him, but this Borg is not impressed by Picard at all. Picard tries the I am Locutus trick, and the Borg blows him off. Picard name-drops Hugh, the Borg the Enterprise encountered a few years ago, who regained his sense of individuality. This Borg is like, whatever. He says he doesn't have a designation like the other Borg the Enterprise has encountered. He has a name, Croesus. And Croesus is like, you all are in trouble because my name was given to me by the One, and the One is going to destroy you. Picard's like, who's the One? Like, the one Billy Gunn? Worf's like, I think you mean badass Billy Gunn. And Beverly says, oh, are you talking about Kip James? I believe he is currently known as Daddy Ass. Croesus is like, the one who is going to destroy you. That's who he is. I just said it. Picard is like, whatever, dude. Data, check this guy and see if he's sending secret messages to the other Borg. And then Picard and the others leave. Now it's just Data and Croesus. And Croesus is like, so how'd you like killing that Borg the other day? Pretty sweet, right? Data's like, yeah, but it's unethical to take pleasure in the death of another being. Croesus says, "Oh, grow up, you loved it. Don't be such a square. Hey, you want to feel that way again? Like, if I could fix it so you felt emotions again, would you do anything to make that happen? Would you kill your best friend?" Data's like, "Yes, I would." "It's okay if you need a second to think about it. I said yes." A bit later, Worf reports that a shuttlecraft carrying Croesus and Data has left the Enterprise without authorization. The rest of the crew, having not witnessed the previous scene, assume that the Borg has somehow abducted Data. They follow the shuttle through another of those trans-warp conduits and track it to a nearby planet. Several landing parties beam down and they begin a search for Data. Troy discovers the command center for Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on the other side of a hill, and Picard's like, "Hey, maybe Zordon can help us out." So they head inside and are immediately surrounded by Borg. Then the leader of the Borg appears. Picard thinks it's Data, but Troy knows better. That's Lore. Bum, bum, bum. Picard's like, "So I guess Zordon sold this place to you after he moved to Eltar? Or would you have bought it from Demetria?" I don't know, I think I had stopped watching the show by then. Hey, wait a minute, are you the one? No Billy Gunn at all? Not even Rockabilly? But Lore has a surprise in store for Picard, Troy, and LaForge. Not Billy Gunn, no, Data. Corrupted by his newfound emotions, he's turned heel, like Billy Gunn when he turned on Road Dogg to break up the New Age Outlaws, and joined forces with Lore and these Borg separatists. And he's got big plans, too. Data tells Picard the sons of Sung have joined together, and together we will destroy the Federation. But first we're going to take a little break over the summer. See you in September. And there's no need to go over Descent Part 2 in that much detail, especially in this video. Briefly, it turns out that this group of Borg broke away from the collective after having their individuality restored by Hugh, the Borg the Enterprise picked up in Season 5. Lore found them and made himself their leader, and he's been kind of remotely sending emotions to Data in order to seduce him to the dark side. Lore captures Picard, Troy, and Geordi, and has Data give Geordi acupuncture as part of an experiment to figure out how to make the Borg into fully artificial life forms. Eventually, Picard, Troy, and Geordi figure out how to turn Data's ethical program back on, and Data turns babyface again, and they defeat Lore with some help from Hugh. Data deactivates Lore and takes the emotion chip Dr. Sung created for him, which Lore had stolen. He's about to vaporize the chip with a phaser when Geordi grabs it and says, "Hold on, Data. I can't let you destroy this emotion chip. Next year, we've got a terrible movie coming out, and something tells me that movie is going to need a subplot. And that movie is currently in pre-production, so you don't have to take my word for it." Back to the question at hand, did Data have emotions all along? Or did he only gain the ability to feel them when he installed his emotion chip? The thing is, it's open to interpretation. We're not talking about real events and real people here. There is no Data, and his ability to feel emotions is not something we can definitively establish or refute with empirical evidence. There is evidence in the text to support both interpretations. So my suggestion is to pick the one that works best for you. As for myself, I favor the interpretation that Data does not have emotions until he gets the chip, mainly because that's what the show seems to be telling us most of the time, and because important beats in Data's character arc rely on that being the case. That does make me somewhat of a prescriptivist on this question rather than a descriptivist, which is typically how I approach things, but I can live with that. I think most of the instances throughout TNG of Data speaking or acting as though he has emotions are best explained by the fact that we ourselves are emotional creatures, and as such, we find it difficult, if not impossible, to imagine going through life any other way. Data may be an android without emotions, but the writers who created him and Brent Spiner, the actor who portrayed him, are human beings whose emotions inform and influence every choice they make. So, if you're watching TNG and detect in Data a spark of wonder or affection or irritation or discomfort, Maybe it's the result of an android attempting to imitate the behavior of the people around him, or maybe it's the result of the creators of the show attempting to bring data to life in a way that is compelling and truthful, and sometimes struggling to bridge the gap between their own experiences and those of someone like Data. And that's not only understandable, I think it's a good thing. Isn't that part of what Star Trek is trying to get us to do? When you scale down, explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations to the level of everyday life, doesn't that just mean reaching out to those who are unlike ourselves? Those from different places, different cultures, different circumstances, with identities and perhaps challenges different from our own, those with experiences unlike ours, and trying to understand them? People say Star Trek doesn't have any Christmas episodes, but when you look at it that way, they're all Christmas episodes. They're almost all Christmas episodes. I want to thank Lester Rookford one more time for commissioning this video. Lester, I hope I did okay. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button on the YouTube page, or by making a one-time donation via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Happy holidays, folks.